The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 18th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Then Peter came and said to Jesus, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, Not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts on his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him, and, as he could not pay, his lord ordered him to be sold, together with his wife and children and all of his possessions, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay back everything. And out of pity for him, the lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went on, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii, and seizing him by the throat, he said, Pay what you owe. Then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, Have patience with me, and I will pay you. But he refused. Then he went and threw him into prison until he would pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. Then his lord summoned him and said to him, You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you? And in anger, his lord handed him over to be tortured until he would pay his entire debt. So my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you, if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Forgiveness is such a basic core tenet of Christianity that when confronted with the challenge of preaching about it, I often feel like, well, what else is there to say? For lack of an elegant way to say it, forgiveness seems so obvious. Although it's also true that one does not need to look far to see how much the world is lacking in forgiveness. But, as I often lament, how can a sermon change that reality? I can tell you and myself over and over again that to live well as a human is to live in sync with the ways of God. But I am also utterly aware of how far short I fall in enacting the ways of God. Forgiveness is hard work. And let's be honest, there are plenty of people who don't deserve forgiveness. This week, I read that some cite that the most challenging word in the Lord's Prayer is as, meaning forgive others as we forgive ourselves. In the Lord's Prayer, Jesus links receiving forgiveness and the ability to offer forgiveness. I need to stop. I have to start that over. I was like, it's not forgive ourselves, it's God forgive us. I was like, did I just say that? Oh.
You're so cute. I need to stop. I was like, what?
I know. I was like, you're probably not paying attention, but I was like, that's not right. Okay, here we go. Forgiveness is such a basic core tenet of Christianity that when confronted with the challenge of preaching about it, I often feel like, what else is there to say? For lack of an elegant way to say it, forgiveness seems so obvious. Although it's also true that one does not need to look far to see how much the world is lacking in forgiveness. As I often lament, how can a sermon change that reality? I can tell you and myself over and over again that to live well as a human is to live in sync with the ways of God. And I am also utterly aware of how far short I fall in enacting the ways of God. Forgiveness is hard work, and let's be honest, there are plenty of people who don't deserve forgiveness, at least as far as I'm concerned. This week, I read that some cite that the most challenging word in the Lord's Prayer is as, meaning forgive others as we have been forgiven. In the Lord's Prayer, Jesus links receiving forgiveness and the ability to offer forgiveness. Now, obviously, there is some truth to this, or a lot of truth to this. At the cross, when Jesus cries out, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," we plainly see that God is a God who cannot stop giving and forgiving. It's in God's very nature. The problem is, it doesn't seem to be in my very nature. Because if I'm truthful, this whole notion of giving and forgiving as God is beautiful. And I can fully imagine that if we lived that way, the world would be more gentle, more generous, more beautiful. But this picture, paired with reality, makes this notion seem like a ludicrous dream. Because when I look at how we actually live, all the talk of generosity and forgiveness makes very little sense. Peter, I believe, feels similarly to me. How often do I have to forgive? Once, twice, 3 times? Now, of course, Peter knows that Jesus is beyond generous, and so he ups the ante. 7 times? In biblical terms, 7 signifies completeness. It wouldn't be a far stretch to imagine that when Peter says 7 times, he recognizes that Jesus expects a lot of him. Peter might be thinking to himself, "See, Jesus, I'm catching on to this whole disciple thing." So when Jesus counters with 70 times 7, he's indicating that when it comes to forgiveness, even 7 is not complete or perfect enough. Do you know how far I am from perfecting just 7 acts of forgiveness, let alone 70 times 7 acts? Part of what hangs me up is the justice element of forgiveness. As most of you know, justice and equity are a big part of my personal theology. I mean, does forgiveness mean excusing or overlooking harm that's been done to us and saying that everything is okay? Or allowing those who have hurt us to persist in those same behaviors, forgetting what has happened? And does forgiveness happen all at once? And can I really just decide to forgive and then it's all over? In my life, I haven't been able to just forget and forgive. Hurts and pains haunt me, and I know that I'm not alone in this. And so writing about forgiveness from the perspective of Jesus seems unattainable and unreasonable, and maybe a little inhumane. I struggled with what word to use to describe how difficult it is for humans to forgive, and how sometimes it seems that forcing the issue of forgiveness seems to mean you must deny your own self and your own needs, your humanness. I guess it's how I ended up at inhumane. I don't think that Jesus is trying to coerce us into forgiveness. I should be upfront about that. What I'm trying to say is forgiving just because we're supposed to denies the very real difficulties that exist in relationships. But it's also true that when we deny ourselves the blessing that forgiveness can offer, parts of our humanity are eaten away. And since God is a giver and forgiver, the part of us that gets eaten away is the portion of God that lives inside of us. Those 2 reasons are why I settled on the word inhumane. And this is the piece that piqued my curiosity this week. How is forgiveness a blessing, and how does it return us to our intended humanity? Now, before I go on, I need to underscore that in the parable that Jesus tells, he chooses situations in which the forgiver stands in a position of power, and the person does not, by forgiving, prolong unhealthy situations or harms or injustices. To me, this matters from a justice standpoint and in upholding healthy and safe relationships. Now, certainly, forgiveness is universally applicable. None of us is without fault. But forgiveness, when enacted, is not meant to bind us. It is meant to free us to be our fully human selves. Which brings me back to the blessing of forgiveness. Sometimes we are given the grace to forgive more easily than other times. But oftentimes, forgiveness requires practice and time. It takes choosing to work at it. We might have to chip away at it again and again and again. For the times when forgiveness is hard work or undeserved, it helps me to think about the 70 times 7 command. Not in the traditional sense where we assume that we have to keep forgiving a wrongdoer over and over again, basically until they're sorry holds no meaning, but rather experiencing Jesus' mathematics as a blessing, as a gift. See, I've often thought that 70 times 7 meant forgiving someone who just keeps wronging you. But what if it's the internal work we do? When the anger over the misdeed flares up again in us, then we accept Jesus' gift of grace, mercy, and forgiveness anew. You receive grace and forgiveness over and over and over again, 70 times 7, so that the hooks of vengeance don't take hold in you. It's not asking us to disregard the wound. That would be asking us to deny our humanity, and that's not what Jesus is asking. But Jesus does not want us to be bound to our anger and vengeance and hurts. That would be inhumane, to allow yourself to be traumatized over and over again by the same tear in the soul. Because these sharp tears will require the fiercest kind of love. God's love, who loves you even when you can't love yourself, who forgives you even when you can't forgive yourself, who deems you worthy even when you carry shame, who cleanses you even when another has sought to sully. Because at the heart of forgiveness lies love of ourselves and love of God. This is what's required to release these deep aches that we carry. I know that we all carry different regrets and secrets and pains. I know that they can keep us up at night. I know they whisper vengeful thoughts and promise satisfaction through retaliation. I know that 70 times 7 may not even be close to enough. But if we allow our pain to consume us, then we've made injury our identity. If we insist on weaponizing our well-deserved anger in every interaction with people who have hurt us, then it's like we're drinking the devil's poison, and the poison will kill us long before it does anything to those who've hurt us. To choose forgiveness is to release ourselves from the tyranny of bitterness. Acknowledging and reckoning with the damage that has been done takes practice and persistence and promise. I think that's why I hear so much blessing in Jesus' words this week. It's like he knows that this business of forgiveness is the hardest grace to give and the hardest grace to receive. It might take 70 times 7 to receive, and 70 times 7 to give, and maybe longer. Forgiveness is not quick and easy. It's a process, messy and nonlinear, often a cutting process that can leave us feeling whole and liberated one minute and bleeding out of every vein the next. Which is maybe why the cross is such an apropos depiction of what it's like to forgive. One moment we're nailed up, certain we will die under the weight of our pains. And then the balm of forgiveness soothes our scars, and new life arises from our wounds. It is hard work. Forgiveness is hard work. But I believe it may be some of the most important, humane work we do as children of God. And so may God loosen the chains that bind us. May we rise. May we enact the healing grace and forgiveness of God. Amen.